The morning Jacob Carter died. Dusford woke to a sky the color of old dishwater. Ellen May stood at the window of their cramped boarding house room, watching dust devils dance down Main Street while her husband's body cooled on the bed behind her. The doctor had left an hour ago, muttering about heart failure and the Lord's mysterious ways. Ellen hadn't corrected him about the empty laudanum bottle hidden beneath the washstand. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging the window. 28 years old and already a widow. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jacob had promised her a better life when he'd courted her back in Georgia, filling her head with tales of fortune waiting in the Western Territories. Instead, she'd found herself in this forgotten corner of creation, watching tumbleweeds and broken dreams blow past. Mrs. Carter. The voice at the door made her spine stiffen. She recognized it immediately. Alexander Harrow, her late husband's father, the man who'd never approved of his son marrying a sharecropper's daughter. "Door's open," she called, not turning from the window. The door creaked, and heavy footsteps entered. Alexander Harrow filled the doorway like a bad omen, his sons Thomas and Luther flanking him. All three men wore their Sunday best, though the funeral wouldn't be until tomorrow. Ellen found that peculiar until she noticed the papers in Alexander's meaty fist. "Ellen," Alexander's voice held all the warmth of a January wind. "My condolences on your loss." "Your son," she corrected quietly. "Your loss too." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Indeed, which brings us to the matter at hand." He unfolded the papers with deliberate slowness. Before his passing, Jacob incurred certain obligations. Ellen finally turned from the window. In the pale morning light, she looked older than her year's sun-weathered skin, work-roughened hands, but eyes that still held a spark of defiance. "What obligations?" "Debts." Thomas spoke up, his thin lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Gambling debts. To be precise, $500. The room tilted slightly. Ellen gripped the windowsill. "That's impossible. Jacob didn't gamble." "Paper says different." Luther, the younger son, waved another document. "Got his signature right here, witnessed and everything." Ellen's mind raced. $500 might as well have been $5,000. She had maybe $10 hidden in her sewing box, and the boarding house rent was due next week. "I don't have that kind of money." "We know." Alexander's smile was cold as creek water, which is why we've arranged an alternative solution. The way he said alternative made Ellen's skin crawl. She waited, knowing that whatever came next would be worse than poverty. "There's a man up on Granite Ridge," Alexander continued. "Silas Thorne. Perhaps you've heard the name." Everyone in Dustford had heard of Silas Thorne, the hermit who lived high up in the mountains, who came to town maybe twice a year for supplies. Stories followed him like shadows. Some said he'd killed a man with his bare hands. Others whispered about a family burned alive back east. Children dared each other to climb the mountain trails just to catch a glimpse of his cabin. "What's he got to do with Jacob's debts?" Ellen asked, though her stomach already knew the answer. "Mr. Thorne has need of assistance, domestic help. You might say he's willing to pay off Jacob's debt in exchange for a year's service." "Service." Ellen tasted the word like bile. "You mean slavery?" Now! Alexander's tone turned patronizing. "Nothing so dramatic. You'll cook, clean, tend his household. After a year, the debt's cleared and you're free to go wherever you please. It's generous, considering..." "Considering what?" "Considering the alternative is debtor's prison." Sheriff Benjamin Briggs stepped into the room, star glinting on his vest. Ellen hadn't heard him arrive. "Morning, Mrs. Carter. Sorry for your loss." The trap snapped shut with audible finality. Ellen looked from face to face, searching for a grain of mercy and finding only cold calculation. They'd planned this, probably while Jacob's body was still warm. "The debt papers," she said slowly.
I want to see them.
Alexander handed them over with mock graciousness. Ellen studied Jacob's signature, her heart sinking. It looked authentic enough, though something about the ink seemed off too fresh, too dark. But what judge would listen to a widow's suspicions against the word of Dustford's most prominent family?
This is wrong,
she said quietly.
You know this is wrong.
What's wrong is not paying one's debts. Thomas interjected, Our family's reputation. Your family's reputation, Ellen's temper flared. Your family's reputation is built on grinding folks down until there's nothing left but dust. Luther stepped forward, hand moving toward his hip. Sheriff Briggs raised a calming hand. No need for unpleasantness, Mrs. Carter. You have until noon to make your decision. Though really, there's only one choice here. Ellen looked around the shabby room at Jacob's boots still muddy by the door, at her few dresses hanging on pegs, at the bed where her husband had chosen the coward's way out, leaving her to face his demons. Rage and grief warred in her chest, but beneath both emotions lay something harder survival instinct. If I refuse, then you'll be arrested within the hour. Sheriff Briggs said almost apologetically. Judge Harrison's already signed the warrant, just needs my signature to execute it. Judge Harrison, who played poker with Alexander every Friday night, of course.
And if I agree,
we leave within the hour, Alexander said. Best to get you settled before the snow starts. Ellen moved to the window again, looking out at Dustford's main street. A few early risers were beginning their day, Mrs. Watson sweeping her store's front step. The Reverend Daniel heading toward the church. Normal people living normal lives, while hers crumbled like old parchment.
1 year,
she said without turning.
Not a day more.
Agreed, Alexander said quickly. Too quickly. Thomas will help you pack your things. I'll pack my own things. Ellen's voice could have etched glass. And I'll need that agreement in writing. Witnessed. Alexander's smile widened. Of course, Sheriff Briggs can serve as witness. 1 year's service to Mr. Thorne in exchange for clearing Jacob's debt. Simple as that. Simple as that. Ellen almost laughed at the absurdity. Nothing about this was simple. But what choice did she have? Prison would kill her as surely as the laudanum had killed Jacob, just more slowly. She packed mechanically 2 dresses, undergarments, her sewing kit, the small Bible her mother had given her, a photograph of her parents. Her hands shook as she folded Jacob's straight razor into a cloth. She didn't know why she took it. Perhaps some part of her wanted to remember that he'd once been capable of caring for himself. The Harrow men waited with badly concealed impatience. When she emerged with her single carpet bag, Thomas sneered. That's all.
That's all,
Ellen confirmed. She didn't mention the knife now hidden in her boot or the last of her money sewn into her corset. Small protections, but they were hers. The wagon waited outside, already loaded with supplies, sacks of flour, salt pork, coffee, apparently. Silas Thorne's domestic help would also be responsible for hauling his provisions up the mountain. As they prepared to leave, Ellen caught sight of Mrs. Watson watching from her store. Their eyes met briefly before the older woman turned away. No help there. No help anywhere in Dustford for a widow without means or family. Beautiful morning for a journey, Alexander observed as Ellen climbed onto the wagon bed. She didn't dignify that with a response. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking a funeral dirge. Ellen didn't look back at the boarding house or at Jacob's body waiting for burial. Instead, she fixed her eyes on Granite Ridge looming in the distance, its peaks already white with early snow. Whatever waited for her up there, hermit, killer, or something worse, it had to be better than the slow death Dustford offered. At least mountains were honest in their cruelty. They didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. As the wagon rolled past the town limits, Ellen made herself a promise. She would survive this year. She would cook and clean and tend house for Silas Thorne. But she would not break. And when the year ended, She would leave that mountain free and clear, beholden to no man. Thunder rumbled across the peaks. Though the sky held no clouds, Luther glanced up nervously. "Storm coming."
Maybe,
Alexander agreed, but his eyes were on Ellen.
then again, maybe it's already here.
Ellen pulled her shawl tighter and said nothing.
Let them think her beaten. Let them believe they'd won.
She'd learned long ago that the best revenge was survival, and she intended to survive this if it killed her. The wagon climbed higher, leaving Dustford behind like a bad dream. Ahead, Granite Ridge waited with its secrets and its hermit and its promise of a different kind of imprisonment. But as Ellen watched the peaks draw closer, she felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not hope she wasn't fool enough for that, but perhaps something close to it. A recognition that mountains, at least, didn't lie. And sometimes, in the wild places of the world, even a woman without means could find a way to be free. The trail to Granite Ridge wound upward like a snake with a broken back. Ellen gripped the wagon's side as wheels scraped against loose shale, each jolt rattling her teeth. The Harrow men rode ahead, their horses picking careful paths through the narrowing track. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were creaking leather, labored breathing of horses, and the occasional curse when stones scattered down the mountainside. By noon, Dustford had vanished beneath a sea of pines. The air grew thin and sharp, carrying the scent of snow though autumn had barely turned. Ellen's fingers numbed despite her gloves. She tucked them under her arms, watching her breath cloud in the cooling air. "How much further?" she called out, hating the tremor in her voice.
Another hour, maybe 2.
Thomas answered without turning. "Depends on the trail." The trail grew worse as they climbed, wagon wheels caught in ruts, requiring all 3 men to dismount and push. Ellen offered to walk, lighten the load, but Alexander waved her back with a curt gesture. "Merchandise stays in the wagon," he muttered, apparently forgetting she could hear. Merchandise. The word burrowed under her skin like a splinter. They stopped once to rest the horses at a creek running fast and cold. Ellen climbed down to stretch her legs, joints protesting the hours of jostling. She knelt by the water, cupping it in her palms to drink. It tasted of stone and winter. "Don't wander," Luther warned, hand resting on his pistol. "Bears around here, wolves too." Ellen almost laughed, as if 4-legged predators were her biggest concern. The final approach to Silas Thorne's cabin required abandoning the wagon trail for a footpath carved into the mountainside. The men unloaded supplies onto pack horses, grumbling about the effort. Ellen shouldered her carpet bag, following in silence as they led the animals upward through stands of aspen and pine. Then, through a break in the trees, she saw it. The cabin squatted against the mountain like something that had grown from the stone itself, built from logs chinked with mud. It looked solid enough to withstand avalanche or siege. Smoke threaded from a field stone chimney. A covered porch ran the length of the front. Firewood stacked neat as cathedral columns along one side. Beyond the cabin, the mountain rose in jagged peaks, already wearing caps of snow. "Hello, the house," Alexander called out, stopping well short of the porch. For long moments, nothing stirred except wind in the pines. Then the door opened, and Silas Thorne stepped into view. Ellen had built an image in her mind from Dustford's whispers, a giant, perhaps, or a scarred monster. The reality proved both less and more unsettling. Thorne stood tall, but not unusually so, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands. Dark hair hung past his collar, streaked with premature silver. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was his eyes that made Ellen's breath catch gray as winter sky, holding an emptiness that went beyond cold. He wore simple clothes, canvas pants, flannel shirt, suspenders. A rifle rested easy in his hands, not quite pointing at them but ready to swing into position. He studied the group with the patience of a man who had nothing but time. "Harrow," he said finally. His voice reminded Ellen of distant thunder low, rough, carrying threat without raising volume. "You're early." "Eager to conclude our business," Alexander replied, trying for jovial and achieving nervous. "We've brought the woman, as agreed." Those empty eyes shifted to Ellen. She forced herself to meet his gaze, lifting her chin despite the fear crawling up her spine. Thorne studied her like a horse he was considering buying, noting stance, condition, temperament. The assessment lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It felt like hours. "She'll do," he said at last, lowering the rifle. "Bring the supplies to the shed. Leave her things on the porch." The men hurried to comply, clearly eager to be gone. Ellen stood forgotten for the moment, carpetbag growing heavy in her hands. She watched Thorne retreat into the cabin's shadows, wondering what she'd seen in his eyes beyond the emptiness. Pain, perhaps. Or maybe that was wishful thinking, trying to find humanity where none existed. "That's everything," Thomas announced, emerging from a lean-to shed beside the cabin. "Flour, salt pork, coffee, ammunition. Should last through first snow." "The woman knows her duties." Thorne had reappeared in the doorway, rifle now leaning against the frame. "Cooking, cleaning, mending," Alexander rattled off. "General household management. She's been informed of the terms. 1 year's service. Then the debt's cleared. And if she runs?" The question hung in the air like ice. Alexander's smile turned predatory. "Then the debt reverts to criminal charges. Sheriff Briggs has the warrant ready. She'd be fugitive from justice, bounty on her head." Ellen's hands clenched around her bag's handles. They'd thought of everything, hadn't they? No escape routes, no mercy. "Understood," Thorne said. He produced a leather pouch from his pocket, tossing it to Alexander. It landed with a distinctive clink of gold coins. "Our business is concluded." Alexander weighed the pouch in his palm, satisfaction creasing his features. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Thorne. We'll leave you to get acquainted." The 3 men mounted their horses with unseemly haste. Luther paused beside Ellen, leaning down from his saddle. "Word of advice," he said quietly. "Do what you're told. Man like that. No telling what might set him off. And there's no law up here but what he makes." Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading down the trail. Ellen stood alone on the porch, carpetbag at her feet, facing the dark doorway where Thorne waited. "You planning to stand there all day?" His voice drifted from the shadows. Ellen picked up her bag and stepped across the threshold. The cabin's interior proved larger than expected, but austere as a monastery. 1 main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space. A massive fieldstone fireplace dominated one wall, fire crackling behind an iron grate. Rough-hewn furniture table, 2 chairs. A bench looked handmade but solid. Shelves held supplies in neat rows. A ladder led to what must be a sleeping loft above. "Your room's through there." Thorne indicated a door beside the fireplace. "Was a storage room. Cleared it out yesterday." Ellen pushed open the door to find a space barely large enough for the narrow cot and small trunk it contained. 1 tiny window let in a shaft of light. It looked like a cell, but at least it had a door she could close. "I'll need water for cooking," she said, setting her bag on the cot. "Creek's out back. Buckets by the door. Fire stays banked at night, uses less wood. Outhouse is 50 yards past the woodshed. Don't wander after dark." Ellen emerged from the tiny room to find him adding split logs to the fire. He moved with economy. No wasted motion. A man comfortable with solitude and routine. "When do you take meals?" she asked. "Dawn, noon, dusk. Nothing fancy. Filling's all that matters." "I'll need to know what supplies." "You can read." He glanced at her, seeming surprised when she nodded. "Lists on the shelf. Write down what's needed. I go to town end of each month." Town, once a month. The isolation hit her like cold water. No neighbors, no help, no witnesses. Anything else I should know? She kept her voice steady through will alone. Thorne straightened from the fire, turning to face her fully. This close, she could see lines carved deep by weather and harder things. A scar pulled at the corner of his left eye, giving him a permanent squint. His hands bore the nicks and calluses of hard labor, but they hung loose at his sides. Not threatening. Not yet. Don't go in the root cellar without telling me first. Don't touch the rifles. Don't ask questions about what don't concern you. Do your work. Keep quiet. And we'll get through this year without trouble. And if I have questions about what does concern me, something flickered in those gray eyes, surprise. Maybe, or respect. Then ask, but don't expect answers you'll like. He moved past her toward the door, collecting his rifle along the way. I'll be checking trap lines until dark. There's venison in the cold box. Potatoes in the bin, coffee if you want it. Then he was gone, leaving Ellen alone in the strange cabin. She stood still, listening to silence settle around her like snow. No town sounds, no neighbors arguing, no wheels on cobblestones, just wind in pine boughs and the fire's quiet crackling. She explored methodically, cataloging resources. The kitchen area held basic equipment: cast iron pans, a few knives, wooden spoons. The cold box contained the promised venison, along with wild game she couldn't identify. Shelves held preserves, dried beans, cornmeal. Basic fare, but workable. The main room revealed more about her employer. Books lined one shelf, unexpected in a hermit's cabin. She traced titles: Shakespeare, anatomy texts, a worn Bible, almanacs. A chess set occupied a small table by the window. Game half finished, as if waiting for an opponent who'd never come. No photographs, no personal touches beyond the books. Ellen built up the fire and set water to boil, falling back on familiar routine. She'd kept house since childhood, first for her parents, then for Jacob. The work was the same whether in a Georgia farmhouse or a mountain cabin. Comfort in competence. By the time Thorne returned, she had venison stew simmering and cornbread baking in the Dutch oven. The cabin smelled of home cooking for perhaps the first time in years. He stopped in the doorway, nostrils flaring slightly. "Supper's ready," Ellen said, not looking up from ladling stew into bowls. He washed at the basin by the door, movements careful and thorough. When he sat at the table, she placed food before him and retreated to the kitchen area. She'd eaten while cooking a few bites of cornbread. A taste of stew, enough to quiet her stomach. "You not eating?" His question surprised her. "I already did." "Sit." Not quite in order, but close. "I don't take meals with servants standing over me like Judgment Day." Ellen hesitated, then took the other chair. She folded her hands in her lap, watching him eat with steady concentration. The silence stretched, uncomfortable as a wool dress in summer. "This is good," he said finally. "Better than—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Thank you." Ellen waited, but he offered nothing more. "I'll need to know your preferences. What you don't like. What you—" "I eat what's put before me." The words came sharp. "Lived too long on hardtack and jerky to be particular now." A soldier. Then that explained some things: the economy of movement, the watchfulness, the books on anatomy. Which war? She wondered. There'd been so many. They finished the meal in silence. Ellen cleared the table, washed dishes in water hauled from the creek. Normal domestic rhythm, except for the man sitting by the fire, cleaning his rifle with practiced ease. The firelight caught on the barrel, on his hands, on the silver threading his hair. He couldn't be more than 35, she thought. Young for such weariness. "I'll need supplies brought up from the root cellar tomorrow," he said without looking up from his work. "Show you what's what." "All right. Lock your door at night." The words dropped like stones in still water. Ellen's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. "Why?" He looked up then, gray eyes unreadable. "Habit. Lock it or don't. Makes no difference to me. But it did. She thought, else why mention it? A warning, a threat, or something else entirely. A man trying to offer what protection he could within the cage they'd both been locked inside. Ellen finished the dishes and banked the fire as he'd instructed. "Good night, Mr. Thorne." "Silas," he corrected. "No call for formality when it's just us and the mountain." Just us and the mountain. The phrase followed her into her small room. She dropped the bar across the door, tested its strength. Then she sat on the narrow cot, still fully dressed, and listened to him moving about the main room. Footsteps on the ladder, boards creaking overhead. Then silence. She finally undressed and lay down, pulling the single blanket to her chin, the darkness pressed close. Absolute in a way town dark never was. No street lamps, no passing wagons, just night and wind and the occasional pop from the dying fire. One day down, 364 to go. Ellen closed her eyes and tried not to think about the man sleeping above her, or the rifle he kept close, or the emptiness in his eyes that looked too much like her own. Instead, she thought about freedom, what it would feel like to walk away from this mountain with no debts binding her. What she'd do, where she'd go. Somewhere far from men who traded women like cattle. Somewhere she could be more than property or burden. Somewhere she could just be Ellen. Whoever that turned out to be. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Winter coming early to the high country. She pulled the blanket higher and settled in to wait for dawn. The first snow came 3 weeks later, drifting down like ash from some distant fire. Ellen stood at the window, watching it settle on the pines, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle. She'd learned the rhythm of the cabin by then when the floors creaked, which door stuck, how to coax heat from the temperamental stove. Silas had been gone since dawn, checking his trap lines before the storm moved in. He'd left without breakfast, just coffee and a handful of jerky. Despite the eggs she'd gathered from the small coop he kept, the man ate like someone who'd forgotten food could be pleasure rather than mere fuel. She'd discovered things about him in these weeks, small details gleaned from silence and observation. He favored his left shoulder, old injury that ached before storms. He could read Latin. She'd caught him with a medical text one evening, lips moving soundlessly over the words. He carved in the evenings, producing small wooden animals with surprising delicacy. And sometimes, late at night, she heard him pacing overhead, boards creaking with the weight of whatever ghosts kept him from sleep. The door burst open, bringing snow and cold and Silas, a deer carcass draped over his shoulders. He dropped it on the porch, stamping, feeling back into his feet. "Storm's coming in hard," he said, voice rougher than usual. "Could last days. Need to get this butchered before it sets in proper." Ellen grabbed her shawl. "Show me what to do." He paused in the act of pulling off his gloves, studying her. "You know butchering." "Helped my father with hogs back home. Can't be too different." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or approval. "Get the good knives from the kitchen. I'll set up in the shed." They worked side by side as snow fell heavier, turning the world white and silent. Silas showed her the cuts, how to separate hide from meat with long, smooth strokes. His hands guided hers when she faltered, steady and sure. Not gentle, nothing about him was gentle but patient. "You learn quick," he said as she sectioned out a haunch. "Had to." Ellen kept her eyes on her work. "No one else to do it after Mama died." "How old were you?" 12. He made a sound that might have been sympathy. They worked in companionable silence after that, breath steaming in the cold air. By the time they finished, snow had piled knee-deep against the shed door. They hung the meat in the cold cellar, then stood looking at the wall of white blocking their path to the cabin. "Well," Silas said, "guess we run for it." He went first, breaking a path. Ellen followed, clutching the wrapped parcels of meat they'd kept out for immediate use. Snow stung her face, filled her eyes. She stumbled, and his hand caught her elbow. steadying her until they reached the porch. Inside, they stood dripping on the rag rug, both breathing hard. Silas's hair was white with snow, making him look older until he shook it off like a dog. The gesture was so unexpectedly boyish that Ellen found herself smiling. "What?" he asked, catching her expression. "Nothing. You just—" She gestured at his still disheveled hair. "You look like you've been wrestling bears." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Did once, bear one." Ellen couldn't tell if he was joking. With Silas, it was hard to know. They settled into storm routine. Ellen made venison stew while Silas brought in extra wood. Stacking it high beside the fireplace, the wind howled like something living, rattling shutters and sending drafts through every tiny gap. But inside was warm, filled with the smell of cooking meat and coffee. "Could be stuck here for a week," Silas said over supper. "Hope you don't bore easy." "I brought books." Ellen had discovered a trunk of them in her room. Novels, mostly. Previous occupants, she guessed, though she didn't ask. "You have quite a library yourself." "Man needs something to do with his evenings." He pushed stew around his bowl. "You read much?" "When I could. Jacob thought it was—" She stopped, old pain flickering. "Waste of time," Silas supplied. "A lot of men think that way about women reading." "Did you—" He looked up, seeming genuinely puzzled. "Why would I care what women do with their minds?" It was so matter-of-fact, so utterly without condescension, that Ellen felt something ease in her chest. "You're an unusual man, Mr. Thorne." "Silas," he corrected again. "And I'm not unusual. Just lived enough to know that stupidity comes in both sexes. Smart does too." After supper, he pulled out his carving while Ellen mended one of his shirts. The storm wrapped around them like a living thing, but inside their small circle of firelight, peace held. She found herself stealing glances at him, noting how his hands moved over the wood, coaxing shape from formlessness. "What happened to her?" The question escaped before Ellen could stop it. Silas's hand stilled. "Who?" "Your wife." Ellen gestured at the mending. "These shirts were made by a woman's hand. Good work, too. And there's that trunk of novels in my room." For a long moment, only the fire spoke. Then, "Clara." Her name was Clara. He resumed carving, but slower now. Fever took her, 3 winters back. "I'm sorry." "Why you didn't know her?" "I know loss." Ellen kept her eyes on her stitching. "Know how it hollows you out." Another silence. Then Silas said, "She would have liked you." Spoke her mind, too. Never could break her of the habit. Maybe it didn't need breaking. This time his mouth did curve, just slightly. "That's what she always said." They lapsed into easier quiet after that. Ellen finished the mending while Silas completed his carving of fox, alert and wary. He set it on the mantel beside others, a bear, an eagle, a wolf, a wooden menagerie watching over them. The next morning brought 2 feet of snow and no sign of stopping. Silas taught Ellen chess to pass the time, patient with her mistakes. She taught him a card game her father had favored, laughing when he proved terrible at bluffing. "You get this look," she explained, dealing another hand. "Right here." She touched the corner of her eye. "Dead giveaway." Clara used to say the same thing. The words came easier now, like speaking her name had broken some dam. "Said I couldn't lie to save my life." Honesty's not the worst failing a man could have. Depends who's asking the questions. There was weight behind those words. History Ellen didn't press him to share. Instead, she played her cards and let him win a hand, just to see if he'd notice. He did. "I don't need pity wins," he said, "but without heat." "Good. You won't get 'em." By the 3rd day, they'd developed an easy rhythm. Mornings for chores, what could be done inside, afternoons for reading or games, evenings by the fire, him carving, her sewing or reading aloud when he asked. She'd discovered he liked poetry. of all things, Byron especially, though he pretended it was just noise to fill the quiet. The fourth day, Ellen found him in the root cellar, staring at something in the corner. She'd ventured down for preserves and found the door already open. Silas. He startled first time she'd ever seen him anything less than completely aware. In his hands was a small wooden box, the kind women kept jewelry in. "Sorry," he said roughly. "Forgot this was down here." Ellen recognized dismissal when she heard it, but something in his face, some raw edge of pain, made her pause. Was it hers? He nodded once, sharp. Then, surprising them both, he opened it. Inside lay a blue ribbon, a thin gold ring, and a tintype photograph. The woman in the image was slight, with kind eyes and a determined chin. She looked directly at the camera, as if daring it to capture anything less than her true self. "She was beautiful," Ellen said softly. "She was everything." Silas closed the box with careful hands. "Came out here thinking we'd build something. New life, fresh start. All the things desperate people tell themselves." "What happened?" "Town happened. People like the Harrows happened." His voice went flat. "I had a business in Dustford once. General store. Did well enough until I refused to extend credit to Alexander Harrow. He didn't take kindly to being told no." Ellen's blood chilled. She could see where this was going. First it was little things. Broken windows, spoiled goods. Then came the fire. Silas set the box on a shelf. Movements precise. Middle of the night. Clara was sleeping in the back room while I did inventory. I got her out, but the smoke... He stopped. Ellen wanted to reach out, offer comfort, but knew he'd reject it, so she waited. "She lasted 3 days. Doc said her lungs were burned. Nothing he could do." Silas turned away. "I sold what was left of the business, bought this land, far as I could get from town while still being able to supply myself. Been here since." "And the Harrows?" "Denied everything. Sheriff investigated. Found nothing. Amazing how blind law gets when gold changes hands." Now Ellen understood the emptiness in his eyes. Not cruelty, loss. Rage turned inward until it became its own kind of death. "Is that why you agreed to this arrangement?" She gestured between them. "To spite them." "Maybe," he finally looked at her. "Or maybe I just got tired of being alone with ghosts." The honesty of it took her breath. They stood there in the cold cellar. Two damaged people brought together by the cruelty of others. Ellen thought about reaching out again, decided on words instead. "She wouldn't want you to stop living," she said carefully. "The woman in that photograph, she doesn't look the type to appreciate waste." Something flickered in his eyes. "You don't know what she'd want." "No, but I know grief. Know how it tricks you into thinking suffering honors the dead. It doesn't. It just spreads the dying around." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed a rusty sound, like machinery starting up after years of stillness. "You always this cheerful. Only during blizzards." That surprised another almost laugh from him. He gestured toward the stairs. "Come on, before we both freeze." Back in the warmth of the main room, something had shifted. The silence felt different, less heavy, more companionable. When Ellen started preparing lunch, Silas helped without being asked, moving around her with practiced ease. They'd learned each other's patterns without realizing it. "Thank you," he said suddenly, slicing bread. "For listening, for not pitying you." "That." Ellen smiled. "Save your thanks. I plan to beat you soundly at chess later." "You can try." She did try, lost anyway, but gave him a better game than before. Outside, the storm began to weaken. Wind dying from howl to whisper. Tomorrow, maybe the day after, they'd be able to dig out, return to normal routine. The thought brought unexpected disappointment. That night, Ellen lay in her narrow bed listening to the settling cabin. No pacing from above. Maybe speaking Clara's name had given Silas a measure of peace. Or maybe he was up there carving another creature for his wooden menagerie, hands creating what his heart couldn't yet feel. She thought about the woman in the photograph, Clara, who'd spoken her mind and couldn't be broken of the habit, who'd loved a man with gray eyes and honest hands, who'd died for the sin of being married to someone who wouldn't bow to the Harrows of the world. Ellen had come here as payment for a debt that might not even be real. But somewhere in the last month, between the daily rhythms and small revelations, she'd stopped feeling like property. Silas treated her as what she was, a woman doing a job, earning her freedom fair and square. No more, but crucially, no less. The storm would pass, the snow would melt, and in 11 more months, she'd walk away from this mountain free and clear. But for the first time since climbing into that wagon, Ellen wondered if leaving would be as simple as she'd thought, not because of any growing attachment to the taciturn man upstairs. That would be foolishness. No, it was the peace she'd found here that might prove hard to leave. The simple rhythm of useful work, the absence of society's judgments and expectations, the way a man could hand her a knife and trust her competence without question. Small things, but after years of being made to feel small herself, they loomed large as mountains. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in temporary softness. Come morning, she and Silas would dig paths, haul water, return to the business of survival. But tonight, warm and safe while winter raged, Ellen allowed herself this moment of something that wasn't quite contentment but was closer than she'd felt in years. The debt would be paid, her freedom earned. What came after, well, that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, there was only the snow, the fire, and the unexpected comfort of no longer being entirely alone. The old trapper arrived on a Thursday morning, his mule loaded with pelts and news from town. Ellen heard the animals before she saw them, bells jingling on the pack harness, the man's voice carrying through the still air as he talked to his mule like an old friend. "Company," Silas said, already reaching for his rifle. Not threatening, just cautious. Ellen had learned to read the difference in how he held the weapon. The trapper emerged from the tree line, a grizzled man in buckskins, face weathered to leather beneath a shapeless hat. He raised one hand in greeting, the other holding his mule's lead rope. Silas Thorne got room for a cold old man and his equally cold mule. "Jedediah." Silas lowered the rifle. "Bit early for your usual run." "Bit early for snow, too, but here we are." Jedediah's eyes found Ellen, sharp despite their roomy appearance. "Well now, heard you had company. Didn't credit it till now." "This is Ellen," Silas said simply. "Ellen, Jedediah Morse. He brings supplies when the weather allows." "Ma'am." Jedediah touched his hat brim. "Pleasure to meet someone who can tolerate this hermit's company." "Coffee's hot," Ellen offered, recognizing her role. "And there's cornbread from breakfast." "Bless you, child. Lead the way." They settled around the table, Jedediah wrapping gnarled hands around his coffee mug like it held salvation. He smelled of wood smoke and wet fur, but his manners were surprisingly genteel as he ate. "So," he said eventually, eyes twinkling, "how's our Silas treating you? Still acting like words cost money?" "I manage well enough," Ellen replied, catching Silas's warning glance and ignoring it. "Though getting more than 3 sentences at a time is a challenge." Jedediah cackled. "That's progress time was." He'd go whole visits without saying nothing but supplies and how much. "You're a good influence. Seems like." "Jedediah." Silas's tone suggested the old man was skating on thin ice. What man needs human company, even if he pretends otherwise? Clara always said. He stopped abruptly, darting a look between them. "Sorry, shouldn't have." "It's all right," Silas said quietly. "Ellen knows about Clara." Jedediah's bushy eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Does she now?" "Well, that's something." He studied Ellen with new interest. "You must be special. Getting him to talk about her. Took me 2 years just to learn her name." Ellen felt heat rise in her cheeks.
I'm just keeping house. Nothing special about that.
If you say so. But Jedediah's knowing look suggested otherwise. Speaking of houses, you two might want to hear what's brewing down in Dusford. Silas tensed. What kind of brewing? The Harrow kind. Jedediah pulled out a pipe, pausing to light it. Alexander's been holding court at the saloon, going on about his property up here, says the woman begging your pardon. Ma'am was stolen, talking about rights and law and such. The law that says I'm working off a debt. Ellen's voice came out sharper than intended. The same law that took his word about that debt without question. That's the one. Jedediah puffed thoughtfully. Though, funny thing, I was talking to Clarence at the bank. He says Jacob Carter paid off his debts 2 weeks before he died. Has the receipts to prove it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ellen gripped her coffee mug hard enough to hurt. Paid off. Every cent, according to Clarence. Course, when he mentioned this to Sheriff Briggs, suddenly those receipts went missing from the bank. Mysterious fire in the records room. Very selective fire only burned that one box. Sons of... Silas bit off the curse, jaw rigid with anger. My thoughts exactly. Jedediah leaned forward. There's more. Harrow's been recruiting, offering good money for men to ride up here. Bring the woman back. Calling it a rescue mission. How many? Silas's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. 6 so far, maybe more. Plans to move when the weather clears? Jedediah's eyes flicked to Ellen. Saying all kinds of things about what's happening up here. Ugly things. Working folks into a lather about Christian duty and saving women folk. Ellen stood abruptly, needing to move. She paced to the window, staring out at the pristine snow. Behind her? She heard Silas ask. When? Week, maybe 2? Depends on the weather and how drunk they stay. But Alexander's determined this ain't about money or debt anymore. It's about pride. It never was about debt, Ellen said without turning. It was about power, about putting me in my place for marrying above my station. Ellen, Silas started. No. She faced them, anger burning bright. I'm tired of dancing around it. Jacob's family hated that he married trash like me. Now that he's gone, they want to prove they were right. What better way than making me a servant, or worse, starting rumors about what's happening up here? Nobody who knows Silas would believe, Jedediah began. Nobody knows Silas, Ellen interrupted. That's the point. They know the hermit on the mountain, the man whose wife died, the one who keeps to himself and trades with gold instead of credit. Easy to paint him as a monster. Easier still when there's a woman involved. Silence settled heavy. Then Silas said, You could leave. I'll take you down the back trail. Get you to the railway before they know you're gone. Ellen stared at him. And go where with what money as a fugitive from justice, because that's what they'll name me. A thief who stole from the Harrows by running from honest work. I have money. Your money. Your charity. Ellen shook her head. No, I'm done running from men who think they own me. Done being grateful for scraps of dignity. They want to fight. Let them come. Ellen, you don't understand. These men... I understand plenty. She met his gray eyes steadily. I understand they'll come whether I run or stay. Difference is, here I have walls. Here I have... She stopped, unwilling to say you. Here I can fight back. Jedediah whistled low. Clara would have liked you, sure enough. This isn't a joke, Silas snapped. No, it ain't. The old trapper's face went serious. Which is why you need to prepare. I can bring more ammunition on my next run. Maybe spread some words of my own in town, though I doubt many will listen to an old coot like me. We'll manage. Ellen said firmly. Won't we, Silas? He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. We'll manage. He agreed quietly. Jedediah left before noon, promising to return within the week. Ellen and Silas stood on the porch, watching him disappear into the trees.
You should reconsider, Silas said. Running isn't cowardice when staying means what fighting possibly dying. Ellen wrapped her shawl tighter. I've been dying by degrees for years. At least this would mean something.
Getting killed for pride means nothing, says the man hiding on a mountain because of pride. His head snapped toward her, eyes flashing. For a moment, she thought he might grab her, shake her, do something to crack that iron control. Instead, he said very quietly, I hide here because the alternative is becoming what they said I was. A killer. The raw honesty of it struck her like cold wind.
Silas.
You want to know what happened after Clara died? I'll tell you. He gripped the porch rail, knuckles white. I went to Alexander Harrow's house, 3 a.m, had my rifle, had my rage, stood outside his bedroom window for an hour, could see him sleeping, could have ended it easy. Ellen held her breath, waiting. But then I heard something, a child crying, one of his grandchildren, having a nightmare. And I thought, what happens to that child if I pull this trigger? What happens to all of them? Do they become like me, hollowed out by loss and hate? He released the rail slowly. So I left, came here, been here since.
That wasn't cowardice,
Ellen said softly.
That was strength.
Was it because now he's coming here? Now you're in danger because I couldn't? Because he's a parasite who feeds on others' pain. Ellen touched his arm lightly.
This isn't your fault.
He looked at where her hand rested on his sleeve. Such a small touch, but she felt him shudder slightly. When had he last felt gentle human contact? When had she? We should prepare, he said, voice rough. If you're determined to stay. I'm staying. He nodded once, sharp. Then we do this right. Can you shoot? No. You'll learn. Can you run in snow? I'll learn that too. Ellen, he turned to face her fully. I need you to understand. If they come, I won't hold back. I won't be civilized. I'll do whatever's necessary to... He stopped, jaw working. To protect what's yours. Something flared in his eyes. You're not mine. You're not property. You're... He struggled with words. You're under my protection. There's a difference. Is there... The question slipped out before Ellen could stop it. They stood frozen, the space between them charged with sudden tension. Then Silas stepped back, rebuilding walls almost visibly. We'll start training tomorrow, he said. Dawn. That night. Ellen lay awake thinking about pride and choices, about men who thought they owned the world and women who had to fight for scraps of freedom, about a man who'd stood at a window with a rifle and chosen not to become a monster. She thought, too, about the way he'd said, under my protection, like the words held more weight than their simple meaning, about how he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, not with ownership or desire, but with something more dangerous, recognition, as if he saw in her some echo of his own damage and determination. The smart thing would be to run, take his money, his back trail, his offer of escape, find somewhere new to disappear. The smart thing would be to avoid the violence bearing down on them like an avalanche. But Ellen was tired of smart, tired of safe, tired of bending until she broke. Let them come. Let Alexander Harrow and his hired thugs climb this mountain with their righteous fury and their twisted justice. She'd meet them with rifle fire and rage, with all the accumulated anger of years spent being less than human in their eyes. And if she died, well, at least she'd die standing. At least she'd die free. At least she'd die defending something, instead of surrendering to the slow dissolution that had claimed Jacob. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. Storm coming, but not tonight. Ellen closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring new trials. Neither of them spoke of what else tomorrow might bring, of how the fight would change them, of what might bloom in the space between violence and survival, between two damaged souls making their stand on a mountain that had already seen too much sorrow. But it was there in the silence, in the way Silas had said her name, in the way she'd touched his arm, in the recognition that they were no longer stranger and employer, but something more complex, something unnamed and possibly unnameable. The storm would come, blood would likely spill. But first came tomorrow, and rifle lessons, and the strange intimacy of learning to fight beside someone who understood the weight of loss. Ellen slept, finally, and dreamed not of violence but of spring, of snow melting to reveal wildflowers, of possibilities neither of them dared name yet. But naming would come, as surely as the storm, as surely as Alexander Harrow's pride would drive him up this mountain, as surely as two broken people might find in each other something worth defending. The next morning came cold and crystal clear. Ellen rose before dawn, dressed in her warmest clothes, and found Silas already waiting by the door. He handed her a rifle without ceremony. "First lesson," he said. "Respect it, but don't fear it. Fear makes you stupid. Stupid gets you killed." She took the weapon, surprised by its weight. Understood. They spent the morning in basics, how to hold it, load it, aim. Silas was a patient teacher, correcting her stance with light touches, explaining each movement. By noon, she could hit a target at 20 paces. Not well, but consistently. "You're a natural," he said, and she heard surprise in it. "I have good motivation." She lowered the rifle, arms aching. "How long before they come?" "Week if we're lucky, less if we're not." He took the rifle, checking it automatically. "We need to set defenses, prepare positions, make them regret coming here." "All right." Ellen studied him. "But when this is done, what then?" He went still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I still have 8 months on our agreement. Are you planning to honor that, or will you send me away?" "Do you want to stay?" The question came out rough. Ellen considered. Did she, this place of isolation and sudden danger, this man of shadows and sorrow? "I want to choose," she said finally. "For once in my life, I want the choice to be mine." "Then you'll have it." Silas met her eyes. "When this is over, however it ends, the choice is yours. Stay, go. Whatever you want. No debt, no obligations." "And if I stay?" Something flickered in his expression. "Hope, maybe, or fear. Then we'll figure out what that means, together." It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was possibility. And that was more than Ellen had had in years. "All right," she said. "Then let's make sure we survive to have that conversation." He almost smiled. "Yes, let's." They worked through the afternoon, setting traps, planning angles of fire, turning the cabin into a fortress. And if their hands touched more than necessary, if their eyes met and held longer than planning required, neither acknowledged it. Time enough for that later, after the storm, after the blood, after they'd earned the right to think beyond survival. But the seed was planted, fragile and stubborn as alpine flowers. And sometimes, in the right conditions, even the most unlikely seeds could grow into something beautiful. Even on a mountain watered with sorrow. Even between two people who'd forgotten how to hope. Even with violence approaching like thunder. Especially then. They came at dawn on the 6th day, when frost still silvered the grass and mist clung to the hollows. Ellen spotted them, first dark shapes moving through the trees below, trying for stealth but betraying themselves with glints of metal and the nervous whickering of horses. "Silas," she called softly from her position by the east window. He was beside her in an instant, rifle in hand. Together they watched the men spread out, attempting to surround the cabin. Ellen counted 8, maybe 9, more than expected. "Recognize any of them?" Silas asked, voice steady as stone. "Thomas Harrow, on the bay mare. Luther on foot by that big pine. Don't know the others." Ellen checked her rifle, hands surprisingly calm. All those hours of practice had worn grooves in her palms and her fear. "Hired guns from town. Maybe drifters."
Silas moved to another window. Tracking movement. They'll try talking first. Alexander's not with them. He'll want legitimacy. Probably sent Thomas to make demands.
As if summoned, Thomas Harrow emerged from cover. Hands raised but posture arrogant. "Silas Thorne, we've come for the woman. Send her out and there's no need for unpleasantness." Silas cracked the door enough to be heard. "She's working off a legal debt. You've no claim here." "Legal," Thomas laughed. "We both know that paper's worth less than kindling, but we'll honor it brought gold to buy out her contract, $500. Just like the debt."
"Not for sale,"
Ellen called out before Silas could respond.
"Not for any price."
"Now, Mrs. Carter." Thomas's voice took on a paternal tone that made Ellen's skin crawl. "You're clearly confused, maybe influenced. Come out and we'll sort this properly." "The only sorting needed is you off my land." Silas replied, "You've got 1 minute to mount up and leave. Or what you'll shoot us all." Luther had crept closer, confidence bolstered by numbers. "You're one man, hermit. We're—" The shot cracked sharp in the morning air. Luther's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. He dropped flat, cursing. "That's your warning," Silas said calmly. "Next one won't be aimed high." For a moment, silence held. Then Ellen heard Thomas shout, "Take the cabin!" They came from 3 directions at once. Ellen dropped to her knee by the window, sighting down the rifle like Silas had taught her. A man rushing the porch came into view, stranger, face twisted with greed or bloodlust. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The man spun and fell, clutching his thigh, screaming, "First blood." Ellen expected to feel horror, guilt, something. Instead, she felt only cold purpose as she reloaded. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Glass shattered above Ellen's head, showering her with fragments. She scrambled to another position, caught a glimpse of Silas firing measured shots from the north window. His face held no expression at all, hands steady as machinery. "Kitchen door," he shouted. Ellen spun to see 2 men trying to force the barricaded back entrance. She fired through the door itself, heard cursing and retreat. Her ears rang from the enclosed gunfire, but adrenaline kept her focused. A rush of movement outside, someone trying for the woodpile, seeking better cover. Ellen tracked him, led him like Silas had shown her with moving targets. Fired. The man stumbled, rolled behind the wood, winged but not stopped. "They're trying to flank," Silas called. "Watch the—" Fire bloomed sudden orange against the wall. Someone had thrown a torch, trying to burn them out. Ellen grabbed the water bucket, doused the flames before they could catch. Smoke stung her eyes. More gunfire. A deadly percussion that seemed to go on forever but probably lasted minutes. Ellen lost herself in the rhythm spot. Aim, fire, reload. The rifle grew hot in her hands. Smoke filled the cabin despite open windows. Then, sudden quiet. "Hold fire," Silas ordered softly. "Listen." Ellen heard groaning from outside. Someone cursing steadily, horses neighing, whispered arguments. "Thorne," Thomas again, but his voice had lost its swagger. "This is madness, people are hurt." "Should have thought of that before you came armed to my home." Silas replied, "Take your wounded and go." Not without the woman. Ellen made a decision. Before Silas could stop her, she showed herself at the window. "Thomas Harrow, you listen well. I'm here of my own choice now. Your father's debt was a lie and we both know it. But even if it wasn't, I'd rather die in this cabin than go anywhere with you." "You're addled," Luther shouted from wherever he was hiding. "That hermit's done something to you." "Yes," Ellen said clearly. "He's treated me like a human being. Revolutionary concept for a Harrow, I know." Someone fired at her voice. Silas yanked her down as splinters exploded from the window frame. "Trying to get killed," he growled, but his hand lingered on her arm. "Trying to end this." Ellen met his eyes.
They need to know I'm not a prisoner.
Another voice outside, older, gravelly. Boy, we didn't sign on for this. Man's defending his home. Woman says she wants to be there. This ain't right. Shut up, Winston, Thomas snarled. You're paid to fight, not think. Paid to fetch a kidnapped woman. Winston shot back. Not to assault folks in their home? I'm done.
Ellen heard horses moving, arguments escalating. The hired guns were having second thoughts. Good. Anyone else wanting to leave? Now's the time. Silas called out. No shame in walking away from a fool's errand. More movement, more arguments. Then Thomas again. Desperate now. 5 minutes. That's all, just 5 minutes to talk to Mrs. Carter. Make sure she's not coerced. Ellen looked at Silas. He shook his head slightly. But she said, I'll give you 2 minutes. But you come alone, weapons left behind. And I talk from the porch, not one step closer.
Ellen, Silas began.
Trust me. She touched his hand briefly. Sometimes words end fights better than bullets.
He didn't like it, she could see that plain. But he nodded. I'll cover you. Anything seems wrong.
You'll handle it.
Ellen checked her appearance disheveled, smoke-stained, but unharmed. Good.
Let Thomas see her reality.
She stepped onto the porch, rifle prominently displayed. Thomas approached slowly, hands visible, his fine coat torn and muddy. He'd lost his hat and his confidence.
Ellen, he started. My father only wants...
Your father wants control. Ellen cut him off.
Always has. Couldn't control Jacob, so now he tries to control me. You don't understand. Family reputation. I understand perfectly.
Ellen's voice carried clear in the morning air, meant for all the listening ears.
Your family's reputation is built on lies and intimidation. That debt Jacob supposedly owed, he paid it. Your father burned the bank records to hide that fact. Shocked murmurs from the hired guns. Thomas flushed red.
That's slander.
It's truth. Just like it's true your father arranged this whole scheme to humiliate me, to put the sharecropper's daughter in her place.
Ellen smiled coldly. But here's what he didn't count on. I found something better than his version of respectability. I found honest work with an honest man. And I'll take that over your family's gilded cage any day.
You're making a mistake, Thomas said desperately. This man, Thorne, he's dangerous, unstable. His wife died because your father burned them out.
Ellen watched Thomas flinch.
Oh, yes, I know about that too. Amazing what truths come out when you actually listen to people instead of believing gossip.
Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes.
Ellen pressed on. Go home? Thomas, tell your father I'm not coming. Not today. Not ever. Tell him the debt is void and everyone knows it. Tell him if he sends more men, we'll be ready. And tell him... She paused, letting steel enter her voice. Tell him I remember every humiliation, every snide remark about my birth, my family, my worth. Tell him I'm done being ashamed of what I am.
This isn't over, Thomas said, but it sounded more like plea than threat.
Yes, it is.
Ellen raised the rifle slightly. Your 2 minutes are up. Thomas backed away, stumbling over rough ground,
at the tree line.
He turned and shouted, Luther, we're leaving. It took another 20 minutes for them to gather their wounded and go. Ellen and Silas watched from the cabin, weapons ready, until the last horse disappeared down the trail. Then Ellen's knees gave out. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, arms strong and sure.
Easy. It's done. You did well.
I shot a man. The reality crashed over her like snowmelt.
I shot him. You defended yourself. Defended us.
His voice was gentle now. All cold purpose melted away.
First time's always hard.
Does it get easier? No, and that's good. Means you're still human. He helped her to a chair. pressed a cup of whiskey into her shaking hands. Drink. The liquor burned, but it helped. Ellen looked around the cabin, bullet holes in walls, broken glass, scorch marks from the attempted fire. We'll need to clean up. Later? Silas knelt beside her chair, checking her for injuries with careful hands. You're sure you're not hurt? I'm fine. But she wasn't, and they both knew it. Adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and shaky. Do you think they'll come back? Not today, maybe not at all. You gave them plenty to think about. He paused, hands stilling on her arms. That was brave. What you did. Stupid, but brave. Learned from the best. Ellen managed a weak smile. You're not exactly cautious yourself. Fair point. He stood, but stayed close. Ellen, what you said out there, about choosing to stay. She looked up at him, this man who'd shown her more respect in weeks than she'd received in years of marriage, who'd taught her to fight instead of assuming she couldn't, who'd trusted her to stand beside him when danger came. I meant it, she said simply. Something shifted in his expression, walls coming down. Just a little. Even after this, after seeing what life here really means. Especially after this. Ellen set down the whiskey, reached out to touch his hand. We defended something today. Together. That means something. He turned his hand palm up, fingers closing gently around hers. Such a simple gesture, but Ellen felt it like lightning. When did holding hands become more intimate than violence? Ellen, he said, voice rough with emotion, I need you to understand. A shout from outside interrupted him. They both tensed, reached for weapons, but the voice was familiar. Silas, Miss Ellen. It's Jedediah. Heard the shooting from the ridge. You folks all right? Silas squeezed Ellen's hand once, then let go. The moment, whatever it might have become, passed. But something had changed between them. Fundamental as stone shifting in the mountain. They were no longer employer and servant, no longer stranger and stranger. They were partners now, forged in gunfire and choice. Everything else, what they might become to each other, would have to wait. But it was there, patient as spring beneath snow. Jedediah burst in, wild-eyed and armed to the teeth. Saw them heading down, looked like they'd been taught some manners. Ellen taught them, Silas said. And was that pride in his voice? Gave Thomas Harrow a lecture he won't forget. Did she now? Jedediah grinned at Ellen. Girl after my own heart always said the best weapon against a Harrow was truth. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up, boarding broken windows, tending minor injuries. Flying glass had cut them both, though neither had noticed in the heat of battle. Jedediah helped, chattering constantly about the sorry state of the fleeing attackers. That one you winged was crying like a baby, he told Ellen cheerfully. And Luther lost his horse, had to ride double with his brother. Quite a sight. As sunset approached, Jedediah took his leave. I'll spread word in town about what really happened. Folks should know the truth. They won't believe you, Ellen said. Some will. That's a start. The old trapper winked. Besides, nothing travels faster than gossip. By week's end, there'll be 10 versions of this story. Harrows can't control them all. After he left, Ellen and Silas sat by the fire, exhausted but too wound up for sleep. The cabin felt different now, marked by violence, but also by successful defense. Their sanctuary had been tested and held. Thank you, Ellen said suddenly. For what? For not treating me like something fragile. For trusting me to fight. Silas stared into the fire. Clara hated being coddled too. Said if danger came, she'd rather face it armed than hide behind furniture. She sounds like someone I would have liked. You're very like her in some ways. He glanced at Ellen. Different too. She was fire, all passion and temper. You're more like steel, bend far, but don't break. It was the longest speech about Clara he'd made. Ellen treasured the trust of it. We balance each other, she offered carefully. You're stone solid, enduring. Together we're...
Together we're what?
Ellen smiled. Together we're a fortress. Apparently. Ask the Harrows. He actually laughed short but genuine.
A fortress. I like that.
They sat in comfortable silence, watching flames dance. Outside, wind sang through bullet holes. A strange music. Tomorrow would bring repairs and decisions, but tonight they'd earned this peace.
8 months,
Silas said eventually.
You mentioned 8 months left on the agreement. 7.5 technically.
We should renegotiate.
Ellen's heart stuttered.
Oh, the terms have changed. You're not a servant here, haven't been for a while. He met her eyes. Partners split earnings, share decisions, equal say in everything.
And if I want to leave before the time's up?
Then you leave free and clear with money for a new start. He paused. But I hope you won't. It wasn't a declaration of love. Neither of them was ready for that. Wounds too fresh, trust too new. But it was something. A beginning. Partners. Ellen agreed.
I can work with that.
They shook hands, formal as a business deal. But their fingers lingered, and their eyes held promises neither quite dared speak yet. Outside, night fell over the mountain. Inside, two people who'd found each other through cruelty and circumstance began to build something new from the ashes of their pasts. It wouldn't be easy. The Harrows might return. Winter was coming. 1,000 challenges waited. But for now, they had a warm fire, a defended home, and the first fragile threads of connection neither had thought to find again. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was beginning. The night after the attack was the longest Ellen had ever known. She lay in her narrow bed, every sound making her reach for the rifle propped against the wall. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams of gunfire and Thomas Harrow's shocked face when she'd spoken her truth. She woke to find Silas already up, boarding the broken windows by lamplight. His movements were careful, favoring his left side. "You're hurt," she said, emerging from her room. "It's nothing. Flying glass caught me during the fight." He didn't look up from his work. Ellen moved closer, saw the dark stain on his shirt.
That's not nothing. Sit down.
"I need to finish." "Sit." Her tone brooked no argument.
Partners take care of each other.
Remember? He sat reluctantly at the table while she fetched water and Clara's old medicine box. The cut ran along his ribs, deeper than he'd admitted. Ellen cleaned it with gentle efficiency, trying not to notice the other scars marking his skin a map of old violence.
"Hold still,"
she murmured, threading a needle.
"This will hurt."
Had worse, but his breath caught when the needle pierced skin. Ellen worked in silence, aware of his warmth, the rise and fall of his breathing. Such strange intimacy, tending wounds by lamplight while darkness pressed against the windows. When she finished, she bound the wound with clean cloth, hands lingering perhaps a moment too long. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You'd do the same for me." She began putting supplies away.
"Have done the same, teaching me to defend myself."
"That's different." "Is it?" Ellen met his eyes.
"We protect each other now.
That's what partners do." Something flickered in his gaze. Heat quickly banked. He stood, pulling his shirt back on with careful movements. "Storm coming. Can smell it on the wind." Ellen accepted the change of subject. They spent the morning securing the cabin, patching what they could. Working together had become natural. She'd hand him tools before he asked. He'd steady boards while she hammered, a dance of cooperation born from weeks of shared space. By afternoon, the first snowflakes were falling. They stood on the porch, watching the world turn white and silent.
"Will they come back?"
Ellen asked.
"Not in this weather.
Maybe not at all." Silas leaned against the rail, profile sharp against the gray sky. "You shook them yesterday, made them think."
"I told the truth."
"Sometimes that's the most dangerous weapon." He glanced at her. Not many would have stood on that porch, faced them down with words instead of bullets.
I was terrified,
Ellen admitted.
Courage isn't absence of fear. It's acting despite it.
His voice softened.
Clara used to say that.
They went inside as snow began falling harder. Ellen made coffee while Silas tended the fire. Domestic routine, but charged now with awareness. Every accidental touch, every shared glance held weight. That evening, as wind howled around the cabin, Ellen found herself reading aloud from one of Clara's novels while Silas carved. The story was about a woman finding love in unexpected places, perhaps not the wisest choice, given the tension humming between them. She knew then. Ellen read that home was not a place but a person, that all her wandering had led her here, to this moment, to him. She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks.
It's rather sentimental.
Clara loved those stories. Silas didn't look up from his carving. Said life was hard enough without books being hard too.
What are you making?
Ellen asked, desperate to change the subject. He held up the piece, a woman's figure, proud stance, rifle in her hands.
Seemed appropriate.
Ellen's throat tightened.
Is that supposed to be me?
If you want it to be. He set it on the mantel with the others. Belongs there. After yesterday. She stood to examine it closer. The detail was extraordinary. He'd captured something essential in the tiny face, a strength she didn't know she projected.
It's beautiful,
she whispered.
So is the subject.
The words hung between them like suspended snow. Ellen turned slowly. Silas remained in his chair, but his eyes held hers with intensity that made her breath catch.
Silas.
He stood then, crossing to her with deliberate steps.
Tell me to stop. Tell me this is too soon, too complicated, too anything. Tell me, and I'll stop.
Ellen's heart hammered against her ribs. Too soon after Jacob, too complicated with their arrangement, too dangerous with hearts already scarred. All true. None of it mattered.
Don't stop,
she breathed. His hand came up slowly, cupping her face with work-roughened fingers. Such a simple touch, but Ellen felt it everywhere. When had she last been touched with tenderness instead of ownership?
Ellen.
Her name was a prayer on his lips.
I didn't think I could feel.
I know. She covered his hand with hers.
Neither did I.
They stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then Ellen, brave Ellen who'd faced down gunmen and heroes alike, took the final step. She whispered softly,
"Love me tonight?"
until his passion shook her core. The words shattered his control, not violently, but like ice melting under spring sun. He drew her close, movements careful as if she might break or vanish. His kiss was tentative at first, question more than statement. Ellen answered by winding her arms around his neck, pouring weeks of growing trust and recognition into the contact. This wasn't the dutiful submission she'd known with Jacob. This was choice, desire, two damaged souls finding solace in each other. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've been about anything." She traced the line of his jaw.
"We've already trusted each other with our lives. Why not our hearts?"
He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where his heart raced. "Because hearts are harder to protect than lives. And I've already lost."
"So have I."
Ellen met his eyes steadily. "But we're both still here, still breathing. Maybe it's time to do more than just survive." Something shifted in his expression, walls crumbling, letting her see the man beneath, lonely, hungry for connection, afraid to hope but hoping anyway. "I'm not good at this," he said roughly, even before Clara. "I was better with actions than words." "Then don't use words." This kiss was different, deeper, surer. Silas backed her gently against the wall, hands framing her face like she was something precious. Ellen felt the careful control in his touch, the banked fire beneath, his passion, when freed, would indeed shake her core, but there was sweetness too, unexpected tenderness from a man shaped by loss. They moved together toward his ladder, toward the loft she'd never seen. Ellen's heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of fear. Not of Silas, never of him, but of her own hunger. When had she become this woman who could want so fiercely? The loft was simple: a bed, a trunk, a small window showing swirling snow. But Silas had made it neat, almost austere, like he didn't feel deserving of comfort. "Second thoughts?" he asked, sensing her pause. "No," Ellen turned to face him. "Just thinking how we both built prisons for ourselves. Maybe it's time to unlock the doors." His hands shook slightly as he drew her close again. "You undo me. Ellen May, make me feel things I'd buried with—" "I know." She silenced him with a kiss. "It terrifies me too, but I'm tired of being afraid." What followed was a revelation. Silas's touch was reverent, mapping her like new territory to be memorized. His passion, when it finally broke free, was intense as a mountain storm, overwhelming but not rough, consuming but not careless. He loved her like a man starving for connection, and Ellen met him with equal hunger. She discovered she could be bold in the safety of his arms, could ask for what she wanted, take what she needed, could give without losing herself. Each touch, each whispered endearment was a small rebellion against everyone who'd tried to make her less than she was. After, they lay entwined while wind rattled the shutters. Ellen traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the strange peace filling her. Not completion, she'd been complete on her own, but complementing, two holes making something stronger. "Stay," Silas murmured against her hair. "Not just tonight. Stay." "We said partners," Ellen reminded him. "Equal say in everything." "Then I'm saying I want you as more than a partner." He tilted her chin up. "Want you as everything. If you'll have me, no arrangements, no debts, just us." A hermit and a widow on a mountain. But she was smiling. "What will people say?" "Let them talk." His arms tightened around her. "They'll do that anyway. Difference is, now we'll face their words together." Ellen considered, in town, she'd be the fallen woman who chose disgrace over propriety. Up here, she could be herself, strong, capable, loved for exactly who she was. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes. Yes to staying. Yes to us. Yes to whatever comes next." She kissed him softly. Partners in all things. They made love again, slower this time, savoring the newness of chosen intimacy. Outside, the storm raged, but inside was warmth and safety and the first fragile bloom of something that might be love. Later, drowsing in his arms, Ellen thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Jacob's desperate widow to Alexander Harrow's pawn to her own woman, rifle in hand and partner at her side. The price had been high fear, violence, the complete upending of her life. Worth it, though. Worth it for this moment, this man, this choice freely made. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked, voice drowsy. "About unlikely blessings." Ellen snuggled closer. "About how the worst things sometimes lead to the best." Philosophical for midnight musings. "You bring it out in me," she yawned. "Among other things." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Sleep, brave woman. Tomorrow brings what it brings." Together. Together. Ellen slept then, deep and dreamless, safe in the circle of his arms. The storm sang around the cabin, but inside was peace. Morning brought crystal skies and a world transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine, erasing all sign of the recent battle. Ellen woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth beside her. "Morning," Silas said softly. He'd been awake, watching her with an expression of wonder. Morning. Sudden shyness struck. In daylight, their nighttime bravery seemed almost reckless. Regrets? He asked it calmly, but she heard the tension beneath. No? Ellen touched his face. Never. You. Only that it took so long? He caught her hand, kissed her palm. Wasted time we might have had? We have time now. Do we? Shadow crossed his features. The Harrows. We'll do what they do. Ellen sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. But I meant what I said yesterday. I'm done running from them. This changes things. If they come back, they'll use this against you. Call you. He stopped, jaw tight. Names I've been called before. Ellen met his eyes steadily. Silas, I need you to understand something. Last night wasn't about rebellion or convenience or loneliness. It was about choice. My choice. And I choose you. He pulled her back down, kissed her with desperate tenderness. How did I deserve you? You didn't. Neither of us deserved the pain that brought us here. Ellen traced his scars, old and new. But maybe we've earned the peace we're building. They rose eventually, driven by cold and hunger. Dressing felt strange, resuming ordinary life after extraordinary change. But when they descended to the main room, Ellen found comfort in familiar routine, making breakfast, tending fire, the small dances of shared space now charged with new intimacy. We should talk about practical things, Silas said over coffee. If you're staying permanently. Such as? Money. The cabin needs expansion if it's to be a proper home for two. Supplies. Whether you want. That is, if we're to be. He struggled, color rising. Whether we're to be married, Ellen supplied gently. Yes. She considered. What do you want? You, however, you'll have me. He reached across the table, took her hand. But I'd be proud to call you my wife, to know others knew you'd chosen me. The brave hermit wants to stake his claim. But she was teasing, squeezing his fingers. The grateful man wants to honor the woman who saved him. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. From myself. Mostly. We saved each other. Ellen took a breath. Yes. When the snow clears, when we can get to town or find a preacher. Yes. His smile transformed his face. Years falling away. Mrs. Thorne. Has a nice sound. Ellen agreed. Though I warn you, I'm keeping the rifle skills. I'd expect nothing less. They spent the morning planning practical discussions of room additions and supply needs interwoven with stolen kisses and wondering touches. The future spread before them, not without challenges, but bright with possibility. That afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing storm damage, Ellen felt a settling in her bones. This was home now. Not the cabin, though she'd grown to love its sturdy walls. Not the mountain, though its harsh beauty had claimed part of her heart. Home was this man beside her, humming tunelessly as he worked. Home was the partnership they'd forged in hardship and chosen in hope. Home was the space they'd carved from wilderness and pain, defended with bullets and words, consecrated with trust freely given. What? Silas asked, catching her staring. Just thinking about Clara's book, about home being a person. Understanding softened his features. She was right about a lot of things. I think she'd approve, Ellen said carefully, of us. I know she would. Silas pulled her close, mindless of the work. She believed in second chances, in life after loss. They stood together in the afternoon light, two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of their pasts. Outside, the mountain wore its winter coat. Inside, warmth bloomed between them. Fragile as spring flowers, but just as determined. Whatever came next, harrows or hardship or simple daily life, they'd meet it together. Partners, lovers, soon husband and wife. It was more than Ellen had dared hope when she'd climbed that wagon weeks ago. More than Silas had thought possible in his self-imposed exile. Sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in the harshest packages. Sometimes you had to fight for the right to choose happiness. Sometimes love found you in the most unlikely places, patient as mountains, enduring as stone. Ellen kissed Silas once more, then returned to work beside him. There would be time for everything now. Time to build, to grow, to heal. Time to discover all the ways two people could create a life together. Time to love and be loved in return, here on this mountain that had become their haven. The storm had passed, the sun was shining, and in a cabin that had known too much sorrow, joy took root at last. The day Alexander Harrow himself rode up the mountain, Ellen was hanging laundry in the crisp morning air. 2 weeks had passed since the first attack, 2 weeks of quiet preparation and deepening connection with Silas. She spotted the riders approaching 15 men this time, Alexander's silver hair visible even at distance. "Silas," she called calmly, though her heart raced. He emerged from the woodshed, took in the situation with one glance. "Inside, now." But Ellen stood her ground. "No, I want him to see me. Want him to know I'm here by choice." "Ellen." "Trust me." She met his eyes. "Like I trust you." Something passed between them, understanding, acceptance. Silas nodded once, then moved to stand beside her, rifle casual in his hands. Together they watched the riders approach. Alexander Harrow looked older than Ellen remembered, face gaunt with rage or sleeplessness. He rode directly to the porch, stopping just outside rifle range. Smart man. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice carrying that familiar condescension. "I've come to correct a terrible mistake." "The only mistake was your family thinking you owned me," Ellen replied steadily. "And it's Miss Thorne now. Or will be, soon as we can manage it." Alexander's face darkened. "You dare." "I dare quite a lot these days." Ellen stepped forward, Silas shadowing her movement, including telling the truth about Jacob's debts, the ones he'd already paid, according to bank records you had burned. Lies spread by a addled woman under the influence of a murderer. Alexander's voice rose. "I've brought Sheriff Briggs and a proper warrant. You'll come willingly or what?" Silas spoke for the first time, voice quiet but carrying. "You'll attack my home again. How did that work out last time?" Sheriff Briggs shifted nervously in his saddle. The other men some Ellen recognized from town. Others strangers looked equally uncomfortable. This wasn't the easy collection they'd been promised. "Benjamin." Ellen addressed the sheriff directly. "You know this is wrong. You know those debts were settled. How much did Alexander pay you to forget your conscience?" "Now see here," Briggs blustered. "The warrant?" Silas interrupted. "Let's see this legal document." Briggs produced a paper, hands not quite steady. Silas strode forward, grabbed it before anyone could react, read quickly. "Interesting," he said. "This warrant is for Ellen Carter, widow. But as she just told you, she's to be Ellen Thorne, making this paper worthless." "A sham marriage won't," Alexander began. "Nothing sham about it," Ellen cut in. "We'll wed proper when we can. Meanwhile, I'm under his protection, on his land, by my own free choice. You have no claim here." "I have a father's claim," Alexander burst out. "You corrupted my son, led him to ruin." "Jacob ruined himself." Ellen's voice turned hard. "With drink and laudanum and dreams too big for his character. I tried to save him. You just used his weakness for your own ends." "How dare you? How dare you?" Ellen stepped off the porch, ignoring Silas's warning touch. "You turned your own son into a tool for your greed, used his debts to manipulate others. And when he couldn't bear the shame anymore, when he took that final dose, you blamed me rather than look at your own part in his destruction." Silence fell like a stone. Several riders exchanged glances. This wasn't the story they'd heard. Alexander's face had gone white.
Jacob, what final dose?
Ellen almost pitied him. Almost. You didn't know your son took his own life rather than face what he'd become under your thumb, and you've been blaming me for a death you helped cause.
Liar!
But the word lacked conviction. Alexander's hands shook on his reins. Ask Dr. Morrison. Ellen said quietly. He knows. He saw the empty bottle, same as I did. Just chose to call it heart failure to spare your family shame. The fight went out of Alexander like air from a punctured bellows. For a moment, he was just an old man learning terrible truth about his child. Then his face hardened again. Even if it changes nothing, you still owe... A new voice interrupted. Actually, it changes everything. Everyone turned. Jedediah emerged from the trees, but he wasn't alone. With him rode Judge William Harrison, Clarence from the bank, and most surprisingly, Reverend Daniel from the church. They'd circled around while attention focused on the confrontation. Judge Harrison, Sheriff Briggs went pale. What are you... Investigating reports of falsified documents and witness intimidation. The judge, a stern man Ellen had only seen from distance, dismounted with surprising agility. Mr. Morse here brought some disturbing information to my attention, along with evidence.
Evidence!
Alexander's voice cracked. Clarence held up a leather portfolio. Copies of Jacob Carter's debt payments. I may have lost the originals in that convenient fire, but I keep duplicates at home. Shows every cent paid 2 weeks before his death. And I have testimony, Reverend Daniel added quietly, from 3 parishioners who heard you, Alexander, discussing how to handle the Carter widow, how to put her in her place. The riders behind Alexander began backing their horses away, distancing themselves from their employer. Sheriff Briggs looked like he might be sick.
None of this proves,
Alexander started desperately. It proves enough, Judge Harrison interrupted.
Enough to void any claim on Mrs. Carter, soon to be Mrs.
Thorne.
Enough to warrant investigation into fraud and conspiracy.
And enough, Jedediah added cheerfully, to ruin your reputation permanent-like. Imagine what folks will say when they hear you drove your own son to despair, then tried to enslave his widow. Alexander looked around wildly, finding no support. His own men avoided his gaze. Finally, his eyes landed on Ellen with pure venom.
This isn't over,
he hissed. You think you've won. You're nothing but poor white trash playing at respectability. You'll always be... The shot cracked sharp in the morning air. Alexander's hat flew off. A neat hole punched through the crown exactly like Luther's weeks before. That's enough, Silas said calmly, smoke still rising from his rifle. You've said your piece. Now get off my land. Our land, Ellen corrected softly. Silas's mouth quirked. Our land, he agreed. Alexander grabbed his ruined hat, face purple with rage and humiliation, but faced with the judge, the evidence, and Silas's steady rifle, he had no choice. This isn't over, he repeated, but it sounded more like desperate hope than threat. Yes, it is, Judge Harrison said firmly. Any further harassment of these people will result in immediate arrest. Is that clear? Alexander wheeled his horse without answering, spurring it down the trail. His remaining men followed hastily, Sheriff Briggs among them looking thoroughly chastened. Judge Harrison turned to Ellen and Silas. My apologies for the delay in justice. Sometimes it takes brave people standing up to make the law remember its purpose.
Thank you, Judge,
Ellen said, still hardly believing it was over. Thank yourselves, and thank Mr. Morse for his persistence. The judge remounted. I believe you mentioned plans to marry. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony. When you're ready. Ellen felt Silas's hand find hers, warm and solid.
We'd appreciate that, sir.
As the judge and others departed, Jedediah lingered. Told you truth travels fast. Just needed the right ears to hear it. How did you manage it? Silas asked. Wasn't just me. The old trapper grinned. Seems Ellen made quite an impression on some folks in town. That Winston fellow, one of the hired guns from the first attack, he's been telling everyone how she stood on that porch speaking truth while bullets flew. Made people think, made them question Alexander's version. But the judge has a daughter about Ellen's age, Jedediah said quietly. Lost her husband young, struggles to keep independent. Maybe he saw something familiar in this story. Maybe he just got tired of Alexander thinking he owned the law. They watched him ride away, then stood in the sudden quiet of their reclaimed peace. Ellen leaned into Silas's solid warmth, feeling like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. "It's really over," she murmured. "That part is." Silas wrapped an arm around her. "Rest is just beginning." Ellen smiled. "Building a life together." "Building everything together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Starting with adding rooms to this cabin. Can't have my wife living in a storage room." "Our cabin," Ellen corrected, echoing his earlier words. "Our cabin," he agreed. "Our land, our life." They went inside together, leaving the morning sun to wash away the last shadows of the Harrow threat. There would be talk in town, there always was. But up here on their mountain, two people who'd found each other through cruelty and circumstance could build something new and strong and entirely their own. In the weeks that followed, as promised, Judge Harrison rode up to perform a simple ceremony. Jedediah stood witness, along with Clarence and, surprisingly, Winston the hired gun whose conscience had started the truth spreading. Ellen wore her best dress, carefully mended. Silas wore his one good shirt, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Do you, Ellen May Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Judge Harrison asked. "I do," Ellen said firmly. Meeting Silas's eyes, in them she saw reflected her own joy, her own wonder at this unexpected second chance. "Do you, Silas Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was rough with emotion. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Silas kissed her then, gentle and thorough, while their small gathering applauded. When they broke apart, Ellen saw tears on Jedediah's weathered face. "Just beautiful," the old trapper blubbered, "like something out of one of them romantic books." "The kind Clara loved," Ellen said softly. "She would have loved this." Silas agreed, arm tight around his new wife. "Loved you." As their guests departed, loaded with food Ellen had prepared, she and Silas stood on their porch watching the sun set behind the peaks. The cabin behind them was already changing new room framed out, garden plot marked for spring, signs of a future being built with careful hands and hopeful hearts. "No regrets?" Silas asked, echo of that morning weeks ago. "Only one," Ellen said. He tensed. What? "That Jacob had to die for me to find you. That Clara had to die for you to find me. That so much pain had to happen for this happiness." Silas turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Can't change the past. Can only choose what we do with what it taught us." "And what did it teach us?" "That love's worth fighting for. That second chances come in strange packages. That sometimes the worst roads lead to the best destinations." Ellen smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Listen to you, all philosophical." "You bring it out in me," he said, catching her hand. "Among other things." She laughed, the sound carrying across their mountain kingdom. "Come inside, husband. It's getting cold." "Yes, wife." They went in together, to the warmth of their fire and the comfort of their bed and the simple joy of chosen companionship. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, two people who'd learned to love again built their world word by word, touch by touch, day by precious day. The mountain stood eternal around them, witness to their unlikely love story. And in a cabin that had known sorrow and loneliness, Laughter finally found a permanent home. It was more than enough. It was everything. It was theirs. Spring came late to the mountain that year, but when it arrived, it transformed everything. Ellen stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Silas work the soil of their new garden plot. His movements were sure and steady. A man who'd learned to build rather than just survive. "Careful with those tomato seedlings," she called out. "Jedediah swears they're from back east." Silas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Everything's from back east, according to Jedediah, including his tall tales." Ellen smiled, moving to join him in the garden. 6 months of marriage had brought changes neither expected. The cabin now boasted 2 proper bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. But the real changes were in them, the ease between them, the shared glances, the way they moved together like dancers who'd found their rhythm. "Letter came with Jedediah," Silas said, producing an envelope from his pocket. "From town." Ellen recognized the bank's seal. "What now?" "Read it." She opened the letter carefully, eyes widening as she scanned. "Alexander Harrow, deceased 3 weeks ago. Heart gave out. According to Clarence." Silas watched her reaction carefully. "His sons are selling off the holdings, moving back east. Seems they've had enough of Dustford." Ellen felt no satisfaction in the news, only a weary sort of closure. May he find the peace he denied others. "Generous of you." "Not generous, just tired of carrying hate." She folded the letter. "We have better things to tend." As if in agreement, a small voice called from the cabin, "Mama, Papa?" Ellen's heart still caught at those words. Little Sarah, the orphan girl from town who'd shown up at their door during a blizzard 3 months back, half frozen and fully desperate. Her parents had died of fever, leaving her to the questionable mercy of the town's charity. Instead, she'd walked 8 miles through snow to the cabin she'd heard harbored kind souls. They'd meant to find her a proper home in town. Instead, she'd found one here. "Coming, sweetheart," Ellen called back, then to Silas. "She's probably destroyed the kitchen again trying to help with bread." "Like mother, like daughter," Silas teased, earning a gentle swat. They walked back together, hands naturally finding each other. Inside, 5-year-old Sarah stood proudly beside a lopsided loaf, flour decorating every surface, including herself. "I made it all by myself," she announced. "I can see that," Ellen said solemnly, while Silas poorly disguised his laughter as a cough. "Well done. Now, let's clean up before the flour rebels and takes over completely." As Ellen and Sarah tackled the mess, Silas watched from the doorway, expression soft. These moments still caught him off guard, the domesticity, the laughter, the fullness where once was only emptiness. He'd thought Clara's death had ended his capacity for such things. Ellen had proved him wonderfully wrong. "Letter came for you, too," he told Ellen, producing another envelope. "From Georgia." Ellen's hand stilled. Letters from home were rare, usually bearing bad news. She dried her hands slowly, took the letter with trembling fingers. "Want me to—" Silas gestured to take Sarah outside. "No, stay!" Ellen broke the seal, read quickly, then read again, sinking into a chair. "Ellen." "My sister," she said faintly. "Margaret. Her husband died in a mining accident. She's coming west with her 2 boys. Asks if—" She looked up at Silas. "If we might have room." Silas didn't hesitate. "We'll make room." Just like that. Family is family. He squeezed her shoulder. "Besides, this mountain could use more life on it. Been too quiet too long." Ellen caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only twice, falling behind your usual count." Sarah, tired of being ignored, tugged on Ellen's skirt. "More family like me." "Yes, sweet girl, like you."
Ellen pulled her close. Aunt Margaret and 2 cousins. Would you like that? Sarah considered seriously. Will they like fishing? Papa's teaching me fishing. I expect they'll love it, Silas assured her. Though we'll need to expand again. Good thing summer's coming. They spent the evening planning where to build new rooms, how to manage supplies for a larger household, the logistics of mountain life with children. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, Ellen felt only anticipation. From hermit to patriarch in 1 year, she teased Silas as they prepared for bed. How does it feel? Like waking from a long sleep, he answered honestly. Like life starting over when I thought it was ending. Ellen moved into his arms, still marveling at how right it felt. No regrets about your quiet mountain. The mountain's still here, just louder now. He kissed her temple. Clara would laugh herself sick seeing me with a house full of children. She'd love it, Ellen corrected. A man like you was meant for family. Maybe, but I needed the right woman to show me that. They stood together at their bedroom window, looking out at their domain. The garden plot waiting for seeds, the expanded chicken coop, the new shed Silas was building, small signs of a life taking root and flourishing. Remember when I first came here? Ellen asked. Angry and afraid, thinking I'd been sold into servitude. Remember, I still see that woman sometimes, when you get riled about something. Same fire, just aimed different now. At weeds and bread dough instead of harrows. Thank God for that. Silas turned serious. Ellen, I need you to know what we've built here. What we're still building, it's more than I ever dreamed of having again. You gave me back my life. We gave each other back our lives, Ellen corrected. That's what partners do. A cry from Sarah's room interrupted them. Night terrors still plagued the child. Memories of loss and cold. Ellen started to go, but Silas was already moving. I'll get her. You rest. Ellen watched him go, heard his deep voice rumbling comfort, Sarah's sobs quieting. Through the open door, she could see him sitting on the small bed. The little girl curled against his chest as he told her a story about brave mountain rabbits. This was what Alexander Harrow had tried to prevent. This was what narrow minds and cruel laws sought to destroy the simple human connections that made life worth living. The freedom to choose who to love, how to live, what to build. Ellen thought about her sister Margaret. Somewhere on a train heading west with 2 grieving boys, they'd find healing here, as Ellen had, as Sarah was, as even Silas had, learning to open his heart again. The next morning brought Jedediah with his usual cargo of supplies and gossip. But this time, he wasn't alone. Winston rode beside him, the former hired gun who'd become an unlikely ally. Mrs. Thorne. Winston tipped his hat. Mr. Thorne, hoping you might have work for a man who's decided to go straight. Ellen exchanged glances with Silas. They'd discussed needing help with the expansions, especially with more family coming. Can you build? Silas asked. Can learn. I'm done with gun work, if that's what you're wondering. Want to build things instead of tearing them down. Starts tomorrow at dawn. Ellen decided. Room and board included, fair wages, but you work hard and you treat this place with respect. Yes, ma'am. Relief crossed Winston's weathered face. You won't regret it. As the men unloaded supplies, Ellen found herself standing where she'd first stood months ago, carpetbag in hand and terror in her heart. The same mountains rose around her, the same wind sang through the pines, but everything else had changed. Wool gathering, Silas asked, coming to stand beside her. Remembering, thinking how strange life's paths are. Strange and wonderful, he agreed. Though I could have done without the gunfights. Made for a good story. Though, Sarah loves the part where I stood on the porch and told Thomas Harrow exactly what I thought of him. Bloodthirsty little thing, Silas said fondly. Wonder where she gets it. Ellen laughed. The sound bright as morning sun.
Must be your influence. I'm sweet as pie.
Sweet as vinegar pie.
Maybe. She elbowed him gently, then grew serious.
Silas, are you happy?
He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. Happy doesn't cover it. Content, grateful. Amazed daily that you chose to stay, chose to build this with me. So, yes, I'm happy, happier than I probably deserve. We both deserve exactly this much happiness, Ellen said firmly. We earned it. That we did. He pulled her close. And we'll earn more. Every day we'll earn more. Sarah came running from the cabin then, braids flying. Mama, Papa, Mister. Jedediah brought peppermint sticks. They watched her race toward the old trapper, who produced the promised treats with theatrical flair. Winston was already sketching plans for the new rooms, consulting with Silas about timber and angles. The day hummed with purpose and possibility. Ellen leaned into her husband's warmth, thinking about all the days to come. Margaret arriving with the boys, teaching them mountain ways, watching children grow strong and free in this place that had given her own freedom back, building something that would last beyond them, a legacy of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation. What are you thinking? Silas asked. That every ending is also a beginning, Ellen said. That our story didn't end when the Harrows gave up. It just started a new chapter. What kind of chapter? Ellen smiled, watching Sarah negotiate for extra peppermints with all the determination of her adopted mother. The kind where love wins, where families are made by choice as much as blood, where two broken people build something whole. I like that chapter, Silas said softly. Me too. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the mountain that had become their kingdom. In a few weeks, Margaret would arrive, the family would grow. New challenges would arise, but for now, there was this perfect moment, husband and wife, daughter laughing in the yard, friends sharing morning coffee, and all the promise of spring spreading green and hopeful across their land. The girl who'd arrived as property had become proprietor of her own destiny. The man who'd hidden from the world had learned to embrace it again, together. They'd written a love story on the wild canvas of the frontier, proved that sometimes the hardest roads led to the sweetest destinations. And this was only the beginning. As Ellen turned to go inside, to start the bread that would feed their growing family, she paused for one last look at the scene before her. This was what freedom looked like. This was what choosing love despite the odds could build. This was home. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Ellen and Silas's story. I hope their tale of resilience, courage, and unexpected love touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. Your thoughts and feelings about these characters make this community special. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of love and adventure from the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button. It really helps other listeners discover these stories of the human spirit triumphing against all odds. Until our next adventure together, keep riding toward your own horizons. Happy trails, partners.